This is so cute. I haven't seen so many of you in such a long time. Hi, I think that's Melissa. Hi. Thank you all for coming. I am Molly Webster. Thank you. Yeah. That's good energy. We want that energy all night. You know me probably from Radiolab, but I am here tonight. Simmer down, E-bomb. You know? Just because you're the best friend, you know, I don't know if you get those privileges. No, but we are here tonight to celebrate Melinda, Wenner, Moyer. Let's just hear it like for the name. And the reason I am here is not because of Radiolab, but because Melinda and I are very good friends. And some of you know this, but we went to grad school together at NYU. We were both in the science journalism program. Dan Fagan, we see you. The guy brought an umbrella with our logo on it. You can talk to him about admission to the program after the talk. Grad school was great, and for me, where my story with Melinda really starts is when grad school ended. I got an email, or maybe it was a text message, and it said, do you want to go on a trip with some of the girls from grad school? And I always thought, I don't know how I got this invite, but I'm going. And so what was birthed out of that first sort of email was a yearly girls' weekend with some of the girls from grad school. Not all of them, but some of them. And it was on one of these trips that the idea for a certain book was born. And when I thought about trying to tell this part of the story, I was like, you know what? I'm going to let our friend Andrea tell you.
Hello. Okay, so I remember Melinda having a pile of books and maybe some papers and sitting kind of at the head of the table, and yeah, she had her pile of chicken books, and we talked about the chicken books and her chicken book, and possibly she was pumping for breastfeeding, but I don't know if that really
So I don't know if you know this, but before the book that we're going to talk about tonight, Melinda had a lot of book ideas. And one of them was about chickens. And this took Girls' Weekend by storm. And it was like very dutifully scientific. There was like antibiotic resistance, and it was going to be about monoculture agriculture. And but like we thought that it should be tagline, "It's a clucking nightmare." And so we were really excited. I don't think Melinda's agent was though. And so moved on to book number 2, and I have to say it was a much better idea. One that was born when she and her husband Michael, who's here in the front, were, I think, at an anniversary dinner, is that right? And I like to imagine like they were just swarmed by really annoying kids the whole time. And they were like, you know what? I have a book idea. And so I'm very excited to celebrate Melinda's first book idea. Though I have to say I'm a little sad It's a Clucking Nightmare has not. This is me trying to bring it to light with the support of a lot of people in this room, I just want to say. So please give it up for Melinda Wenner Moyer. So the ground rules here are, there aren't a lot of them. We're going to talk, some profound excerpts are going to be read, and at some point I will tell you that you can walk to this microphone and ask questions. However, this is not a therapy session, so keep some of your problems with your kids to yourself. But we will get to that. We will get to that in a minute. I just want to start by saying, are you sad about the chicken book?
I'm a little sad, but you know what? That chicken book actually got written.
Really?
Yeah, by Mary McKenna.
Oh,
and it was very good. Very good. What did you not use? It's a Clucking Nightmare, though, so I think that was good.
We also had It's the clucking worst.
Yeah,
Was another. There were. It was a smart.
Mother
There was a lot of smart thinking that weekend. But in all seriousness, I do remember, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. In your book, you talk about how you sort of were like, do I want to write a book about parenting? Because I'm just going to walk around telling other people how to parent, and that makes me uncomfortable. And I remember that, but I also remember that there was like another part of the story, which was kind of this feeling of like, is anyone going to take me seriously if I write a parenting book? Like, I went to this cool school, and I do science journalism, and I really love evidence and that kind of thing. And so I just would love to hear about how you wrestled with that and like what ultimately made you at that dinner go like, fuck it, I'm in.
Yeah, so I wrote a parenting column for Slate for many years, and parents would always say, like, why don't you write a parenting book? This is the obvious thing you should do, is write a parenting book. You write about parenting. And yeah, first of all, I was like, I don't know how to parent. I have no idea what I'm doing, so why would I tell other parents what to do? That was the first part. And then, yeah, I found when I wrote about parenting and when I saw other people writing about parenting, it was like denigrated always as mommy blogging. It was never taken seriously. And I mean, it felt very sexist, but I also didn't want to be looked down on. I wanted to be like a real science journalist, I wanted to like write about real things. And for whatever reason, I feel like in our culture, parenting is not important enough. And so I really worried about like, would this kill my reputation as a science journalist? But then, it was around 2018, and Trump was in office, and Brett Kavanaugh was being confirmed to the Supreme Court. And if you remember, Trump went on TV making fun of Christine Blasey Ford, and all sorts of yucky things were happening.
It was a really good time.
It was really awesome. Oh, and Me Too had just exploded. Like all of a sudden, like everybody we thought was okay was actually terrible. And I just started thinking about my kids, and I started thinking about like the future of the world, and I got really worried. And I thought, really more than anything else, what I want as a parent is to raise kids who aren't assholes. I mean, it was as simple as that. Like, I did not want to raise Donald Trump, was essentially what it came down to. And funnily enough, I talked to other parents, and they were like, we're having the same conversation. Like, we used to worry about making sure our kids, got into college, and of course we still worry about that. But, it was like all of a sudden the pressing thing was like, how do I not raise Donald Trump? And that ultimately, and then suddenly it felt like, okay, this isn't just a parenting book either. Like, if I were to write that, it would feel like a book that would actually, like, it could change the world for the better if people actually read it and if it was good. Like, it could help raise a future generation of people who would, maybe change the world. And
well, I think that's so interesting because you always tease me because I read your newsletter. I read like Melinda has this like How to Raise Kids Who Aren't Assholes newsletter, and I read it like avidly every time it comes out.
Asshole.
And then is my kid the asshole? Fact check, live fact check. And so I was like, oh, this is such a great newsletter, and I'm always like emailing Melinda about it, being like, oh, that anxiety one was so great, and she's like, why are you reading this? I don't have kids. And but one of the reasons I think it's amazing is because probably because I'm a narcissist, but I read it and I'm like, oh, this explains so much about the way I act in the world, because you're like, it helps you reflect on like where you come from and like how you're like what authoritative parents, or the bad ones, authoritarian. I love them, but it was like strong. Yeah. And so I just think, and so it was one of the reasons I love your newsletter. And I was wondering if it just feels like the messaging and some of the tips in the book go beyond a parent-child relationship, but also like, do you think about it just dealing with a colleague or a partner? Or your sister, I wonder if that comes into play ever.
Yeah, I've never thought about that actually, but it does. Like, I think about the things that I've learned and like the ways to respond when people are not acting in savory ways, and like what's actually constructive, what's a constructive way to respond, and what's like, and yeah, and there's a lot from the parenting literature that I can take from that and use, like, you know, when like Michael forgets to take out the trash, and I'm like, but no, and what's like the more constructive way for me to engage with that? So yeah, no, it's true. Like,
well, it is. This actually gets into one of the excerpts that I want to do. Are we good for an excerpt? Okay. If you want to do the praise one,
yes,
I'm
absolutely.
switching it up here. I was going to start with another one, but we're not doing it.
Okay.
Yeah, start there.
Okay. You may have heard people use the term growth mindset before, which is often contrasted with fixed mindset. When people have a growth mindset, they believe that ability and intelligence are largely shaped by effort and hard work. When people have a fixed mindset, they think that ability is instead mostly innate. You were born smart or not, end of story. You may already even know that mindset is in part shaped by how you praise your kids, but it's not all as simple as it sounds, and people often misunderstand the research. So let me unpack the findings and their implications in a bit of detail here. In one of the most famous studies in the mindset field, psychologist Carol Dweck and her colleague Claudia Moyer invited fifth graders from 3 public elementary schools, one in the Midwest, composed mostly of white kids, and 2 in the Northeast with mainly Black and Hispanic kids, to participate in a series of studies. First, the researchers gave all the students intelligence tests and told them they'd done well. Wow, you did very well on these problems. You got X number of problems right. That's a really high score, they said. Then they praised the students in various ways for their success. 1/3 of the kids were told, you must be smart at these problems. Another third were told, you must have worked hard at these problems. And the last third were given no additional feedback after being told they'd done well. Next, the researchers asked the students what kinds of problems they would like to do next. Ones that were pretty easy, so I'll do well, or problems that I'll learn a lot from, even if I won't look so smart. They found that the kids who had been praised as smart were much more likely to request the easy problems, whereas those praised for hard work were more likely to choose the challenging problems. The control group was evenly split. When the students were later given harder problems to do, ones that they indeed did struggle on, those who'd been praised for their smarts were less likely to persist on the problems than those who'd been praised for hard work. And they also said they enjoyed the challenge less. When the researchers listened to the students reporting how well they'd done on the problems to other students, they heard 38% of the students who had been praised for being smart lie about how well they had done, saying they'd solved more problems than they actually had, whereas only 13% of those in the hard work group and 14% of the control group lied. The findings point to a pretty clear conclusion. When you praise kids for smarts or ability, they become less interested in learning and overcoming challenges, and they become more interested in safeguarding their reputation. In a nutshell, they lose motivation and launch into self-protective mode. Those who are praised for working hard, on the other hand, are more likely to embrace challenges and stay motivated. Why does this happen? As Dweck explained, praising for ability and intelligence primes kids to think of ability as a fixed trait. Either they have it or they don't. If succeeding means I'm smart, then failure must mean I'm dumb. Therefore, they avoid failure by avoiding challenges. If, on the other hand, kids believe that success comes from working hard and overcoming failure, which happens to kids who are praised for their effort, then they come to see failure as useful, a brief but essential stumble on the road to success. As Dweck explained in Mindset, in one world, the fixed mindset, effort is a bad thing. It, like failure, means you're not smart or talented. If you were, you wouldn't need effort. In the other world, the growth mindset, effort is what makes you smart or talented.
I found like that self-protective mode so interesting because people say like, oh, you're a good drawer or something. And anybody in this room could get like so afraid to then make another drawing because you're like, oh, what if this is the one that shows that I'm not a good drawer? Like, what if this is the one that takes me down? But can you talk more about that?
Yeah. this is something that I think I've struggled with for a long time. I think we all were kind of raised in this fixed mindset world. You know, like your parents say you're smart, your parents say you're good at math or whatever. And so it's really, really hard. But I worked on this with my son, who's 10. And it's kind of like a little experiment. I was like, let's see if this stuff really works. Because he was very much a kid who did not like challenges when he was younger. Like if something was hard, he started playing the cello, and it was hard. I mean, he was like pretty good at it, but it was hard, and he did not want to practice. And he was like, I'm so bad at this. I'm so bad. Like I can't do it, and I don't want to do it anymore if I can't already do it. Like and I remember him saying like, I want to already know how to play the cello. And I'm like, well, it doesn't work that way. But then like I read Carol Dweck's work, and we really started, Michael and I really started like trying to talk to him about, you know, things that are hard make your brain grow. Like you learn through challenges. And he was playing soccer, I remember, and his team was so bad. They lost like every game in a season, and every time like they would lose, we'd say, but you know, I bet you learned something from this. Maybe you learned something. And I'll never forget that like one morning he crawled into bed with us on the weekend, and he said, Mommy, I kind of prefer losing my soccer games now, because then I always learn something. And it was like, my brain exploded. I mean, it was like,
That's so sweet.
I mean, we still struggle with it. We still, like, but that moment, I was like, oh my God, it works.
Oh my God, okay, I'm going to take that chapter really to heart then. Yeah, I do think that's interesting, because one of the other things we talk about in praise is like how to praise.
Yeah.
Because I think, and I was just talking about this with one of my work colleagues who's here, I'm always just like, you're amazing, you know? And my partner's like, okay, I don't know what that means. Like, really? Like, you know, and he's like, I need specific details. And you talk about that in your book about like, there's a way to praise, and it's more like praising the action, not the attribute or something.
Right, yeah, praising the effort, and also not just praising the effort, but tying it to the outcome. So if your kid, you know, does well on an English test, you instead of saying like, oh, you're so smart, you're so good at English, you would say, oh, you must have worked really hard in preparation for this test, and that's why you did well. And so you're both like praising them for the hard work they're doing, assuming that they did some hard work, and also then praising, you know, tying it to the outcome. I remember once, like, it's tricky, because there was one time when Dean like did well on I think it was a math test, and I was like, oh, that must have been because you like worked hard. And he's like, I didn't work hard, and I was like, oh, and I remember like I remember saying something like, well, you know, that's too bad. Like I wish the test had been challenging, because when you have to work hard and work through challenges, that's how your brain grows, and I like having your brain grow. So like you can get into these tricky situations where you're like, how do I praise that? But generally speaking, it's like praising for effort and tying it to the positive outcome.
Are you ever just like, I don't know what to say here, I'm just gonna go make spaghetti and sauce, and you know, like, because as I was reading your book, I just thought, God, how do you keep your composure this much and think through like every moment as it's happening?
Yeah, no, I don't. No. I get a lot of it wrong. I yell at my kids. Like I make all the mistakes too. But I often will go back to a situation. Like something will happen, and I'll be like, I don't really know how to handle this, and I'll do whatever comes to my mind. And then later on, I'm like, oh, I know how I should have talked about this, or I know how I should have explained this, and then I will like go back and revisit it and say like, hey, you know, I don't think I handled that conversation all that well, but I've been thinking about it, and here's you know, let's talk about it a little bit more, and I think that's normal. Like I was, after I wrote this book, I was like, okay, now I'm gonna be like super mom, and I'm gonna know how to do everything, and that's totally not what happened. And I think it's partially because like parenting is so reactive, it's so emotional. And it's, yes, you can have like a rational way of handling it, but you can't always access that in the moment. It's certainly like, over time it has gotten easier for me to access that, but I still have to fight that sort of reactive, you know, me.
Yeah. I wonder if, since writing the book, if a situation has come up that you hadn't researched and you're like, oh, I wish I could research that and figure out how to handle that situation, you know? Because there were so many things in the book, race, gender, behavior, praise, you know, that are like, oh, you got those now. You know, and then I wonder if there's ever one where you're like, oh gosh, should have researched that.
Oh, totally, yeah. Yeah, one that I was thinking of recently because, again, my 10-year-old inspired me. He's like now in this phase where he thinks he knows everything, and like he doesn't know very much at all. But he's like, well, you know, Mars has 8 moons, and you know, and I'm like, no, actually, he's like, yeah, it does. And
I love 2 science parents.
I actually don't know anything about Mars and moons. That would be my husband's search. But 2 moons, thank you. But like he will just be so confident and like, but in a really obnoxious way, like overly, you know, arrogant. And so one thing I did not look at for the book is like arrogance. Like what's the best way to push back against arrogance? What's the best way, like if your kid is being a total arrogant jerk, to like respond to that?
Yeah.
So
that's a good one.
Yeah, I know. That's going to be a newsletter. Well, that's actually like why I have my newsletters. Because I keep coming across things where I'm like, I don't know how to deal with this, and I know a lot of parents don't either. So I'm going to do it for the newsletter, and then I can kind of keep learning and you know, and
Get your follow-up book together.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Do you want to do the first gender one?
Sure.
This is a juicy one.
Yeah, this is the one that some of the conservative radio show hosts were like, I don't know if I'm proud of this. Okay.
So we're here for it.
Yeah, you're here for it. No conservative radio show hosts here, right? Okay. At first, when they are young, girls don't think of themselves as inferior to boys. In a 2017 study published in the journal Science, developmental psychologists Lynn Bion, Sarah Jane Leslie, and Andre Simbian told 5, 6, and 7-year-old kids a brief story about a person who was really, really smart. The kids were then asked to guess which of 4 strangers they saw in photos, 2 men and 2 women, was the protagonist. The 5-year-olds tended to believe the really, really smart character was someone of their own gender. Boys picked men and girls picked women. This is classic in-group versus out-group psychology. Whatever group you belong to, you like better. But the study found that the hierarchies start to shift in girls' minds around the age of 6. This is when girls begin to internalize the idea that they're not as smart or as capable as boys. When the researchers in the study asked 6 and 7-year-old girls which of the 4 strangers was the really, really smart protagonist, the girls were more likely to pick a man. The boys picked men no matter how old they were. Just after she turned 6, my daughter illustrated to me the depth of her own internalized sexism. She turned to me and asked whether she could one day change into a boy. I wasn't sure what she was getting at, so I asked, well, do you want to turn into a boy? And if so, why? She replied, and this absolutely shattered me, that she wanted to change into a boy so that she could one day become president.
That's killer.
You know?
What do you do in that moment?
I'm trying not to cry. I think, yeah, I mean, in that particular moment, so I said to my daughter, I don't know how many times that, you know, girls can be president. Like, this is not something that she didn't have this information, that nobody had ever talked to her about this, and we talked about how there are female prime ministers all over the world. Like, she knows, on some level, she had been told and she knew that she could become president, but on another level, on the level of like our culture and the messages it's sending her, and of course the fact that no women have become president, she had just internalized, no, like, girls can't be president. And so I think I said something like, well, oh no, you know, we talked about this, and we talked about the prime ministers who are women, and we talked about how Hillary Clinton almost became president, and we will have a female president soon, I'm sure, but you know, that only goes so far, right?
Yeah, well, because the insidious part of like that you dug out of the research in the gender chapter was we can try to talk about it, but it's so ingrained in like the day-to-day. Like one of the examples you talk about is just the use of constantly dividing people by gender, whether that's to go into a bathroom, to line up at school, to I've recently been thinking about how we use colloquially like, hey guys, hey, or boy, or oh boy, or, you know, and I've been trying to like strike those from my language and just be like, gee, you know, but there's a lot of folks happening, and so what was that like to uncover, like while you were researching? Because I almost think that feels impenetrable.
Yeah, that research was really difficult to read because it's just so ingrained in our culture, in our language. I mean, so with gender, so kids are like little detectives. They're always constantly looking around trying to understand like why the world looks the way it is, what social categories matter. And we are constantly hitting them over the head with the fact that gender matters, because anytime we refer to a person, I mean, almost any time we indicate their gender. It's built into our pronouns. So hundreds of times a day, kids are hearing.
That's it. I just want to say that number in the book is insane. If you actually think about like what messaging are you getting hundreds of times a day, that's insane.
Yeah, right. Like we don't indicate like what somebody's hair color is or how tall they are or what their eye color is when we talk about people, but we almost always indicate their gender. And kids notice this and they're like, gosh, gender must be really important. And if gender is really important, that must mean boys and girls are really different. Because that's the conclusion you would make, right? And then they combine that with, okay, so they have this, boys and girls are really different, with what the world looks like in terms of gender hierarchies. And yes, things are getting better, but we still have never had a woman president. We still have very few female senators and congresswomen compared to men. You just look at the world and you see men are more powerful and they're more wealthy in general. They're just like, they have higher status, right? And so kids then combine this idea of like, wow, boys and girls are really different with, wow, boys have more power, and then they conclude, well, I guess this means like boys are just better, they're smarter. And this is why at age 6 or 7, you see girls starting to infer, and it's also coming from, by the way, like all of the really subtle ways that we indicate what we think is important for boys versus girls. Like my son will get complimented for being smart or this, that, and the other. My daughter gets complimented for having a nice dress on or looking pretty or having a nice braid. And I mean, constantly she's being told like her appearance is what defines her. Her appearance is what really matters. And my son is being told no, what you do and who you are and how smart you are is what matters. And so that also is contributing to this. And it's like it's just everywhere,
Yeah, it reflected in a really interesting way off some of the race stuff you get into with the book, which is like some of the approaches that people have been trying with race is like, let's just not talk about it, and like everyone will be colorblind. But you're thinking, wait, if the gender stuff, if there's all this subtle messaging and we are talking about it, even if we're not really talking about it, like isn't the same thing happening with race, essentially? It's so in the room, even if you're not like actually having an overt race conversation.
Right. Yeah, a lot of the things are similar in that, kids do see a lot of like segregation. They see they see that race matters in our society, and they see the hierarchy as well. But it's different. Instead of talking about it all the time like we do with gender, we don't talk about it ever with race. And that also sends a signal to kids that like, wow, this is like taboo, like race is bad. And this is like really titillating. It must be really important if like it's so obviously out there and it matters in terms of who people, like what they do and how their lives turn out, and yet like nobody ever talks about it. Like that sends a really important, like really big message about the importance of race too, but just in a different way.
I feel like for me, I know at the end of your book you talk about like some of your big takeaways, which is like empathy, kindness, kind of thinking about that. And for me, I feel like my takeaway was just like transparency. It's almost like the word that's in the book that's never in the book, about just like it just be as transparent as possible. You're nodding. Do you want to?
Yeah. No, I could not agree more. But you're right. I don't think I ever used that particular word. But what so many chapters came down to, and like for each chapter, I dug into like a separate area of research in child development, but I kept finding this theme of like, talk more to your kids especially about things that are hard to talk about. It was basically like that was the overarching message, like talk to your kids about gender stereotypes and sexism, talk to your kids about race and racism, talk to your kids about sex, talk to your kids about pornography. These are all topics that we don't want to talk about, but in not talking about them, we're expecting our kids to learn about them through like our world, which is very broken, and through friends, and they're not particularly reliable, as we know. But also just like talking about like what we're experiencing. Like every time we have a conversation with our kids,
I love this. Yeah. Keep going. Keep going.
every time we have a conversation with our kids, it's an opportunity to share our values and like our worldview. And we do it in subtle ways, but like our kids get those messages. And so the more we just like, the more we talk.
And I like the there's one part where you decide to tell Dean about that you're tired. You're like making food at the stove and she's tired and she was just like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to finish all the work that I have today. I'm really tired. And he responded so sweetly. And so part of the conversation is not just talking towards the kid, but like inviting them in to talk back to you, right?
Yeah. It's like talking about the fact that you had a hard day and why it was hard and like how you coped with it, or maybe you didn't cope with it well, and like that's a good conversation to have. Like, wow, I really like yelled at my colleague today because I was so tired and I wish I could have handled it better. And you can say like, what do you think I should have done in that situation? And my kids are always like, take deep breaths. Oh my God. And speaking of, like, I was telling Dean that I was so nervous for, I don't remember, it was a book related thing. And he was like, Mom, I think it was the event I had in Cold Spring. He's like, okay, here's my advice. It's like, just pretend that everyone is naked. And then he said, but Mom, no. You know what else he said? He said, just have a conversation with the person next to you. Don't worry about the audience.
Yes.
He didn't say the naked thing, I totally made that up. And then he said, I don't remember. I think my daughter told me that. And then he said, and just be yourself, Mom. Just be yourself, it'll be great. Like, it was so lovely.
And you're doing so how did you, a process question, how did you decide, or did you have to think about like how to use your kids in the book and when to? Like there's an example in the book of your son Googling the phrase naked bodies. And I was like, does Dean know that I know that he Googled naked bodies? And so, I would love to hear about that.
This is
so tricky, right?
Hard because, I talked to my kids about the fact that they were in the book. Like I asked their consent, but like they're kids, I mean, how much can they consent? I did make I did make the decision that I was not going to put their names in the book. Yes. I mean, for whatever that's worth, like of course somebody who is good at Google can figure out who my kids are, but that felt like some kind of boundary that felt good. But yes, I share stories about, the things that they've said, and some of them are embarrassing, and I've said to them, like, is it okay if I talk about these embarrassing things? And they've been like, that's fine, it's okay. They'll probably kill me in 10 years.
And then they'll write a book about how they were raised to be assholes.
Screwed them up, yeah, probably, yeah. But it was hard though, because it's definitely a jungle. But if I didn't share anything about my life as a parent, I feel like it wouldn't be an authentic book either. Like, so it was a struggle. But I don't know whether I got it right. But
yeah, there's very warm vulnerability in the book, both in like about the kids, but about being a parent and just about you and your personal reactions to things that also make it a very good read. I want to allow questions. So the microphone is here. I feel like I'll ask like one more question while you all get your sea legs and come up to the microphone. You can form a queue or do it like one at a time. I'll leave it up to you to decide. And if no one comes up to the microphone, I will call on people. Let me think. We had emailed about this a little, but I wonder if there's any parts in the book where you found out about research or a tactic, like a way of working with kids where you were like, I never would have done that, or this is so surprising to me, or something like that.
Yeah. Well, there was certainly, I was shocked at how much of the research aligned with how important it is to talk to kids about feelings, like just how interesting. I don't know, and how important that is for developing generosity and helpfulness in kids. And it's just kind of counterintuitive. Like, why would talking about feelings, why would allowing feelings have anything to do with your kids being generous? But the idea is the more we talk about feelings, the more kids can recognize other people's feelings. And in order to be generous, in order to be helpful, you have to recognize what somebody else needs. And this is part of a skill called theory of mind. And the better theory of mind skills kids have, the more generous and helpful they are. And there's one actually like super cool study that I love talking about, which illustrates this like to a really kind of crazy degree, where researchers invited moms and their kids, and there's a lot of research that does not include dads, and this is another, I will not go down that tangent right now, but it's very frustrating. But this was research where moms and their 3 and 4-year-olds, I think, were invited into the lab and the moms were asked to read a book to their kids. And the researchers observed and recorded how many times did the moms pause their reading to talk about feelings. And then they made a note of that. And the assumption was that when parents did this in the lab, they probably did this at home a lot, like they probably talked about feelings a lot. And then in the second part of the experiment, the kids were individually invited into another room with a researcher. And the researcher would feign needing help, like she would drop a pencil and be like, oh, I wish I could reach my pencil. Or she'd be like, I'm so cold and I wish I had that blanket over there. And they would see what the kids did, and they found that the kids whose moms talked about feelings the most were much more likely to help the researchers who needed help. And that was so interesting, because it's like you see this direct relationship between like talking about feelings and your kids being, more interested in recognizing other people's feelings and responding to them.
And like, what's the theory there? Like, if you were to talk to one of your kids about, I don't know, like, are you feeling frustrated, or what does that feel like, and why, and like, oh, that must be so terrible. Why do scientists think that then if you put them in a situation with someone who's cold, they'll get their jacket or something?
I think it is a matter of like, when you talk about feelings, you're also helping kids understand what feelings look like, what they mean, and when you do that, then they can then more easily recognize, like, based on a person's body language or their facial expressions, like how they're feeling, and then they might think, gosh, I don't like feeling that way. And it's just like, it creates, I think, just this more, it's like they have a better grasp of the world of emotions, and so then it's easier for them to look at somebody else and want to help them and want to make them feel better.
Yeah, it is. Emotions are cool. I feel like I just grew up with anger, happiness, sadness. It was like, pick one of those. How you feel today? You're like, I don't know. Questions. Burning questions. Oh, there we go.
Hi.
So, I don't have kids, but I have a niece and nephew, and I'm kind of constantly afraid that I'm messing them up. So I was wondering if you could speak to how you deal with when your kids come home with an idea that they've heard from another adult that might be contradictory to what you want to teach them. And how do you do that without being like, well, your friend's mom is an idiot?
Oh, yes. Yes. I feel like this is the question of our times.
Also good if the other adult is a family member.
Oh, yeah. That happens a lot,
Aaron
too.
Smith with the hypothetical.
Yeah. Might be true, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I know. So this again comes back to talking to kids about the messiness of the world. I think as parents often we want to protect our kids and present things in black and white and say, and just simplify things. And I think in these situations we really can, obviously in an age-appropriate way, say, people have different ideas about the world, and some, and you might say it sounds like your friend's mom may be scared about something, or and talk through why that person might have told your kid or your niece, nephew, what they said, and empathize with that person, but also say, but I don't believe that, or I don't agree with that, and here's why I don't agree with that, and here's the basis for my worldview that's different. And here's how I got there. And so you're engaging with them about the fact that yes, people can have different ideas, but you're also sharing your values by saying, here's why I don't think that's true, and here's why this, or I really don't agree with that, and here's why maybe they think that, but I think they're not correct. So it's just being okay with that.
It is also such an interesting dance, because you don't want to create kids that are mini clones of you, right? In some way you're have a value that's different than mine, so I know you're thinking independently, and I don't know, I wondered if you thought about that when you wrote the book, because a lot of it is sort of almost like inviting the kid into your world, you know?
Yeah, and but I think by doing that and by, again, like talking about the fact that, you know, different people have very different opinions on things and maybe you don't agree with them and you think that they might not be right. That then gives them, you know, that is giving them like an understanding of the world as being complex and the fact that like they might have a different opinion about something than you do. And we talk actually a lot in our family about like opinions versus facts and you know, like my son will be like, orange is a terrible color, and we're like, but no, that's an opinion, that's not a fact, and let's talk about the difference. So also just like parsing out like what different bits of information mean and explaining that. I think that also is really good for kids, like how do you evaluate information and how do you know who to believe, and like we have a lot of conversations like that in our house. But these kinds of situations are good opportunities to talk about that, like how should we decide who's right? Like what is the research we can do to figure out like which opinion has more merit, or is it based in fact, or is it not? Like,
thank you. We have time for a few more questions. Someone's pointing. Oh, come.
She asked like almost my exact question. Terrified of screwing up the children in my life. But I'm wondering if there's anything that like intuitively you felt about raising kids that when you dug into the research you were like, oh, that's like way different than what I thought it was. Like just based on how I would react naturally.
Yeah, there was a lot. I mean, well, the first time I uncovered the race research and realized just like how counterproductive colorblind parenting was, that was very eye-opening because I was definitely raised by parents who did not talk about race. And then I was like, oh my God, that's like the worst thing you can do. That was a big one. But, you know, one of the things I found really interesting when I dug into the research on self-esteem was that, you know, I feel like we're often so quick to want to protect our kids from disappointment, and we want to always make them feel good, like no matter what happens. You know, we give them participation trophies when like they get third place, and that is so well intentioned, and we're just trying to like make our kids feel good all the time, but ultimately that undermines their self-esteem. And there's also like particular things in that vein that we do. So like when we give really inflated praise. I talk a lot about praise in the book in different ways. When we say like, you know, our kid draws a stick figure drawing and it's like, not very good. And we're like, oh, that's the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen. When we do stuff like that, research has shown that kids who already have kind of low self-esteem, when parents give this kind of inflated praise, and parents are more likely to give inflated praise to kids with low self-esteem, it actually deflates their self-esteem even more. And they're not totally sure why this happens. It could be, again, like feeling like pressure, like mom really liked that drawing and now I don't know if I can do it again. And if I don't do it again, then I'm a failure. But yeah, like our well-meaning attempts to protect our kids from failure ultimately make them like really scared of failure. And when they experience it, they think less of themselves. They're like, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. And so in a way, the more they can encounter challenges and failure, and this gets back to growth mindset too, then the more they realize, you know, they can get through things and they can learn from things, and failing on this does not mean mom and dad don't love me. So it's good to like let our kids go a little bit, let them screw up, let them forget their homework, don't drive the homework to school, which is so hard. Like my son like forgets his water shoes and his bathing suit sometimes at camp, and for the most part, like I want to drive it in, but I'm also like, but we don't, and he's so upset, but then he survives, right? And he's like, and then next time he's like, I think I should remember my water shoes, and he remembers them better. But like letting them have those moments of disappointment can be actually like good for developing their sense of self.
It's interesting because when I was preparing for this, one of my friends told me, this is a quote that he said to his mom, you always told me I was the most brilliant, and then life came and hit me in the face and I wasn't prepared for it. And I thought about that. I thought about that a lot reading or it reflected a lot of reading the book and like thinking about that praise section. There are so many juicy things in the book, you know, like, and things that just scream like, you know, let's talk about race, let's talk about gender. But there was something about the praise chapter that just feels really critical to like the day-to-day, you know, at any level of relationships.
Yeah.
Last, I'm gonna give you two are it.
All right.
Okay, come on up.
Thank you. I read some of the book as I was waiting. I was expecting yet another parenting book, but your book is thrilling. Wonderfully written and wonderfully researched. This isn't just opinion. These are, everything is researched. So I have two questions. One is, how do you keep your kids from being assholes when public figures are such assholes?
Yeah.
And this has been asked before.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump's gone now, thank God. But when Trump calls people names and shithole countries and all that, but even now, you see the hearings on the riots, and you see Jim Jordan saying it's all a fraud. How do you tell your kids that the big, important people in America are telling you something and it's not true? That's the first question.
I may hold you to one,
Oh.
because I'm on a tight timetable
Okay.
here, because people want drinks.
Okay.
So is that your favorite question? Okay, go with that one. Go with that one.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that is what inspired me to write the book, was seeing all this bad stuff happening and thinking, like, how do I talk to my kids about this? How do I deal with it? And I mean, we talk about it. I think that's, again, like, as parents, sometimes we think our kids shouldn't know what's going on in politics, and that it's irrelevant to them. So what we started doing is just bringing those conversations to the dinner table and saying, here's something that happened today, and this person said this, and we disagree, and here's why, and here's what they said actually isn't true, and you can do the research and figure out why it's not true, and here's maybe why they lied about it, and what they care about is protecting themselves and power. So I think to the extent that we can have these conversations about people behaving badly, why it happens, what they're doing, why it's wrong, then it kind of buffers our kids when they encounter those things in the future, to be able to interpret them better and to be able to understand what's going on and not just take those words as the truth. But it's hard, yeah, because there's a lot of bad behavior out there.
I think that's a high point, though.
I mean, you can retract your
No. Well, I was gonna. I'm so sorry with you. This is for everybody else in the room. I have a 6-year-old, or an almost 6-year-old, and as you know, it's been COVID, so I might have yelled at him. And so one of the things that I've been struggling with, because I read the bullet points on parenting magazines, because I'm a parent. So it's just the bullet points, and then they're like, "You're praising your kid too much." And then they're like, "Oh, but if you don't want to yell at your kid, go crazy when they do something that you like." So, just to take an example, I'm like, "I'm so happy you're sitting there leaving me alone so I can work in drawing. That is great." And then, the drawing comes and I'm like, "That's terrible." So that's my question, is how do you reconcile those two things?
And I think you also bring up a good point of just changing advice.
Yeah.
And one day it's no tantrums, the other day it's no timeouts, the next day it is timeouts. So I wonder too, when you're,
Yeah, I mean, this was another reason I wanted to write the book, because there's so much parenting advice out there that is just based in conjecture. There's just theories. People are like, this feels like the right thing to do, so I'm going to tell every parent to do it. It's it's really frustrating. And so I was like, I want to dig into the science and figure out, is there actually an answer to this that's clear? In some cases it's not. In some cases it's it really kind of depends on the child. There's all these ways that it's frustrating sometimes. But that was the inspiration for the book. I wanted to know, is there science on this? Because if there's science on this, then I can trust this more than I can trust, the random person on Instagram who's, telling me that I'm doing the parenting wrong, right? And there are so many, by the way. Yeah, I mean, as far as, reconciling these things, I don't have a good answer other than, I just root it in what I can find in the research. And if you're hearing contradictory things, it's probably that one person's making stuff up. Maybe both of them are. But that's, what you should do is you should submit it as a question for my newsletter, and then I will dig into the science for you and answer it.
Please give it up for Melinda. We're going to send you all off to party. I'm just going to thank the Cell Theater, which we are in. It's pretty amazing. Sarah Simring, Jonah Levy, Ricardo Romanero. Did I do that right?
Yeah.
And Brian Reger, right?
Yeah.
And then Michelle Howery, Ashley Hewlett, Emily Milnick, and Larry Weissman. They all helped the book come into fruition. And last but not least, I would like to thank one very special lady named Karen Schrock there are drinks, wine, lemonade, seltzer, I'm sure everything, everywhere, and maybe there's a book giveaway. So, yeah, go. Be merry. Food, everything.